Hello and welcome back to my channel, and today I'm ranking the films of Sergio Leone, the great Italian director. A director I first fell in love with when I was a child. I used to watch The Man with No Name trilogy with Clint Eastwood, who was one of my favourite actors as a kid. I used to watch it with my dad, and I used to love all the action and the wonderful gunshot sounds. And it also made me laugh a lot. I think people forget how funny Leone's films are. But the most transformative experience for me watching Sergio Leone was when I was 9 years old and I was left on my own in the living room to watch The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I watched the whole thing. And I remember vividly at the end of it when Clint Eastwood rides off across that big plain and the wonderful music. I remember feeling this incredible sense of loss. I'd felt like I'd been in this wonderful Wild West world for so long. It was my first experience of movie time, this kind of eternal Wild West that Leone sets his films in, and I loved it and I missed it as soon as it was finished. I've gone back to his films many, many times over the years, and he's one of my favourite directors, and I've come to the conclusion that Leone is the great instinctive director of world cinema, by which I mean he's got the most instinctive sense of sight and sound, of image and music, and merging them together. His films just, they feel so right. Intellectually, thematically, they may not be the most clever or the most interesting films, but I think they're the most beautiful, just in terms of the rightness of the editing, the image, the composition, the colour. Everything is so perfect. It just feels so natural and organic. And I think he's probably the great instinctive director of cinema, and that's why I think in some ways he's actually underrated. It's interesting saying that because when Leone's first film, A Fistful of Dollars, which is my number six choice, I'm not including The Colossus of Rhodes, his early Sword and Sandals film, which I've never actually seen. But when A Fistful of Dollars hit world cinemas in 1964, it was a major event and it was very popular. But it was not that popular with critics, many of whom rejected it. Now, why did they reject it? They rejected it because he was this Italian imposter moving into the hallowed world of the American Western and seeming to take the piss out of it, right? He wasn't treating it with the reverence of Ford or Hawks or Anthony Mann. He seemed to be making a sort of postmodern pastiche of it, rather like Tarantino makes postmodern pastiches of genres. So he takes the shell of the genre and plays around with it like in a playground. And there was a similar feeling that Leone was doing this with the Western, sort of pastiching it. And they also didn't like the fact that he took this beautiful genre, he made it more violent, he made it more coarse and vulgar. He put in lots of very cynical humour, lots of people being killed and almost for fun, for amusement. It got the backs up of many critics. Let's go back to this idea that what Leone was doing was, in some senses, postmodern. Like Tarantino takes a genre and exploits it for its genre elements and has fun with them and plays with them, was this what Leone was doing in the Western? Now, let's have a quick talk about postmodernism, an area of art that most lecturers and artists and writers dread talking about because it's never properly been defined. But I'll lead with two quotes from Umberto Eco, the Italian writer. One quote is this. He says, "If a man comes to a woman and wants to say, 'I love you,' it's become cliched. It sounds a bit tired. So what he says is, if this was a Barbara Cartland novel, I would say, 'I love you.' Therefore, he's told the woman he loves her, but he's also put it in a context which is new and sounds fresh." In a sense, that's what Leone is doing with the Western, isn't he? He's taking all these tired Western tropes and refreshing them while at the same time absolutely using them in the course of his story. So he does have the Undertaker who comes out and starts making coffins and measuring bodies, just like Mel Brooks will do in the comedy Blazing Saddles. All the elements are all there, right? The second quote from Umberto Eco is this. It revolves around the Disneyland castle. That castle, which is completely unreal, has become the image in our minds of what a castle looks like, right? That's a fairy tale castle. That's what it looks like. It's become more realistic to us than an actual castle mouldering away in the English countryside, right? It's what, Umberto Eco calls hyper-reality. And in a sense, that's what Leone's Westerns do. If you look at Leone's Westerns, I go back to what I said about The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, this sense of eternity, this sense of an eternal Wild West. Leone takes the Western genre and he lifts it away from its reality, those real place names, those real events of American history, and he takes it into this mythical zone, right? This kind of timeless world, with loners, gunmen running around in this kind of never-ending desert, this mythical place where time has stopped still and there is only the Wild West. That's the feeling of the Man with No Name trilogy until the American Civil War comes along, of course, in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. There's something about the Wild West in Leone which is more mythical, more powerful, more eternal, more primal. Think of that extraordinary scene in Once Upon a Time in the West where the boy has the man balancing on his shoulders. He's being hung from that huge archway. Do you remember that? And the archway looks out into nothing, just a vast plain, a vast eternal plain, something prehistoric. And there's no other vista quite like it in cinema. Leone has taken the myth of the West and he's forced it, he's amped it up to the max. It's more mythical than it's ever been. Part of this is down to the way he works, right? So the Sergio Leone Westerns were quite odd. Here was an Italian director working with a largely Italian cast, making the films in Spain, importing a couple of, American actors in. So the films in their actual making are in a never-never world, right? They seem halfway between Europe and America, halfway between America and Mexico. They're in a never-never world, and that increases their mythical power, I think. Adding to that is the use of sound, the brilliant music by Morricone, which was completely original and completely transformed the musical score, but also the use of sound effects. Up until quite recently, all Italian films, the sound they didn't film in sync sound, in direct sound. The soundtrack was composed and put on afterwards, right? And of course, that's also part of the dubbing of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, where all the actors are dubbed apart from Clint Eastwood or Lee Van Cleef, etc. So there's an unreality in the sound which matches this kind of unreal nowhere space or everywhere space of this kind of Spanish America. And that adds to this powerful mythical sense. So a lot of critics disliked early Leone, but I think Leone created something completely new in cinema. He got into trouble with A Fistful of Dollars because a lot of critics felt that he just pinched the script of Yojimbo, which is an Akira Kurosawa Japanese film, and actually the makers of that film got royalties off of the Fistful of Dollars production team. A court case found in their favour, which is a bit rough, I think, but anyway. The first film, A Fistful of Dollars, it's sixth in my list. It's the most basic of the Leone films. It's a simple story about a lone gunman who seems to come from nowhere and belong to no one. He comes into a town which is, there's two big opposing families against each other, and he plays them off against each other to get the money, etc. It's a great film. It's dominated by Morricone's brilliant new score, this brilliant new music, and it's an extraordinary movie. But I think Leone got better and better and better, and this is just the start of the treats to come. My fifth choice is this film, For a Few Dollars More. This was the sequel. I feel bad putting this film so far down this list because I absolutely adore it. I think that A Fistful of Dollars is a great movie, but For a Few Dollars More sees Leone just ramp up in confidence. I love the way the movie starts. It has this long shot across this great plain, and there's a man just toddling along on his horse, whistling to himself. That's all you see, and then suddenly a shot rings out, and he dies, and you get the credits. And this is that sort of laconic humour that so annoyed some of the critics at the time, and they thought was taking the piss out of this glorious genre of the Western, but which I found very funny when I was a kid. And it's all part of this wonderful stylistic excess of Leone. The stylistic excess in this movie, it's a great movie where Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef are pitted against the wonderful Gian Maria Volante, who plays the villain in the first two Dollars films, a wonderful Italian actor with an incredible face and wonderful eyes. And Lee Van Cleef has got a beef against Volante. He wants revenge on him. And, Clint Eastwood is there to help him and get the money. There's so many sequences in this film that I love. I love the way that Leone has found this new partner in Morricone, and they work together, and the music dictates the film. Leone used to have Morricone's music done before the film, and he was playing it on the set to the actors to guide the action. So that's where this idea comes from, that there's something operatic or balletic about Leone's movies. And so the final shootout, it's wonderful, long, paced-out shootout between Lee Van Cleef and Gian Maria Volante, and it's all based around this tune when they open this watch, this musical watch, and it's a brilliant piece of music. And he does that first long extended shootout. But my absolute favourite scene from this film is the bank robbery, and this is where Morricone and Leone work so brilliantly together. And there's this. So what it is, the music is very modernist, and Morricone was so inventive and so clever, and it goes dum 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 dum, and each part of the beat is an edit, and the edit always finishes with the shot of the cupboard which holds the safe with the money in it. So you look round, the various parties are moving around the bank, and each edit is going and it always goes back. And then, so you've got this very long, slow build-up with this very modernist, disquieting, sort of disjunctive music that always goes back to the vault. And then suddenly there's an explosion. Boom! The wall of the bank explodes. And then Morricone's music is magnificent. It just lifts. It goes da 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 da, and they run off with this thing. And Gian Maria Volante's acting is so expressive and so full, and there's this kind of sense of euphoria. They've blown up the bank and got the safe, and they dash off in the dust of the desert. It's a fantastic sequence. I love watching it over and over again. My fourth place is A Fistful of Dynamite, and again I feel very guilty for not putting this higher. This is a grossly underrated film. Now, this is where Leone took on politics. It opens with the quote from Chairman Mao that revolution is not a dinner party, it is not refined, it is not gentle and leisurely, it is an act of violence, one class overthrowing another. And the thing is, it's known as A Fistful of Dynamite in the US and UK. It's known as Giù la testa in Italian, Duck You Sucker, which is a great name. I actually prefer the French title. The French called it Once Upon a Time, The Revolution. I like that because it links the film with Once Upon a Time in the West and Once Upon a Time in America, making that the trilogy that ends Leone's career. But also because that's what this film is about. It's not a fun action western, as A Fistful of Dynamite indicates. It's actually, it is a fun western, but it's actually got a very strong political point to make. And that point is made by Rod Steiger. Wonderful. Rod Steiger is always over the top, isn't he? But playing a Mexican revolutionary suits him. He's really good in this part. And I also think Coburn is excellent as the IRA explosive expert who links up with him. And Rod Steiger says, revolution is the people who read books telling the people who don't read books, you've got to stand up and fight. And then when it's all over, the people who read the books take back control. A bit cynical, but there's some truth in it. Pier Paolo Pasolini commented after the film came out that he thought the politics stunk, but that it was a major work. I love this movie. I really strongly recommend you get a good quality version of it, like this Eureka release in the UK, the restored version of it. Even in the restored version of it, it's a bit of a broken film. Leone didn't quite get the editing of it as he wanted it, and there's certain elements narrative-wise that don't work. But I think it's an extremely strong movie. There is a wonderful score for it by Sergio Leone. Um, and this is not the crude movie that it's often characterized as being. I mean, if you listen to, for example, Mesa Verde, which is the third track on this CD, it's a beautiful piece of music where these Mexican peasants go to the big town. And for them, it's this extraordinary place, this huge place, this kind of, this kind of paradise. And that music really conveys it beautifully. It's an absolutely superb score, I think. Very underrated score by Leone. I could talk about this movie all day. It's full of extraordinary sequences. It's so underrated. Please do watch it again. If you've watched it and thought, I'm not sure about this movie, try it again. It's a really extraordinary experience. In third place, with some reservations, I'm going to put Once Upon a Time in America. My reservations about this film are about its sexual politics. I'm not easily offended, but the two rape sequences in this film are grotesque, I think. I don't really like the sexual politics of the film. There's an awful scene where this woman goes along a line of men sort of shaking their penises. It's not very nice. I don't really care for it very much. And I have all sorts of issues with this film, partly because it was a broken film. Leone edited it to almost a 4-hour cut. When it was released in the UK and the US, they butchered it, and it was almost unwatchable. And since then, there's been a sort of game of trying to find the proper version. The most fully restored version I saw in Italy, and the way you can tell if it's the most restored version is it features Louise Fletcher, who was the nurse from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Do you remember her? And she has a small, very strange scene with Robert De Niro in the present when he's looking back, and he goes to this tomb, and she has this rather odd sequence, and that's how you know you're watching the fullest version. There's also a lot more political discussion in the fuller version about James Woods and his later role in politics and his dealings with the unions, which you don't find in any other version. If you can find that version, I strongly recommend it, because the restored moments, they're poor picture quality, but it's much the best version of the film. The joy of this film is twofold. First of all, the scenes in New York in the 20s and 30s with the young boys are incredible. And I think it's the best work that Leone ever did, actually. The scene where the boy, Patsy, he's come to the local girl who does favours for the boys, and he's brought her a cake as payment for favours, but then he's sitting on the stairs and he's so hungry because he's so poor that he just eats the cake. At that moment, I think Leone's cinema and Ennio Morricone's music reach their apotheosis. I think it's an extraordinary scene. And all the scenes with the boys, are absolutely incredible. The death of Cockeye, with him falling on his knees, an extraordinary sequence, and the music is incredible. I strongly recommend the CD soundtrack. I've listened to it so often. The second track is called Poverty. I've never heard a piece of music that so powerfully represents that theme, that idea. It's almost got a Dickensian flavour. It's so powerful and so beautiful. And Cockey's song and Deborah's theme, it's an extraordinary soundtrack, one of the great soundtracks of world cinema. I love the film. I've been a sucker for the idea that you get in certain stories that, there's this moment, there's this one thing you did, this one time in your life, which scars you forever and determines the whole rest of your life. And it's beautifully explored in this film. This is the best example of it. And the moments when Noodles, played by De Niro, comes back from his exile, back to New York, and he comes back to the bar where he used to be, and he looks at the photographs on the wall, is so incredibly moving. This is the great movie of reminiscence, of looking back. An extraordinary film. At number 2, I go back to The Good, the Bad and the Ugly that I spoke about at the start of the video. This movie was my favourite movie as a child. It's still one of my favourite movies now. It's absolutely incredible, in whichever version you watch it. I strongly recommend the full Italian version if you've never seen it, because it fills the background of the American Civil War, and particularly the journey of Lee Van Cleef's character, through the Civil War. He goes to this hospital. That is a bit too much cut in the American and UK version, and this fills it out beautifully. Um, I don't even know where to start with this film. There's, of course, the incredible music by Morricone, which is legendary and iconic. There's the great performances by Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, and especially Eli Wallach, who is amazing as Tuco. I love his performance as Tuco. I adore one of my favourite characters in anything when I was a kid and a teenager. Um, the extraordinary footage at the end of that cemetery in Spain, when he's just running around the cemetery. Again, that's another apotheosis of Leonean music. So you have that scene when he's running around like crazy trying to find the grave, and Morricone's music is allowed to play out at full and at full blast. And then you find the grave, in comes Clint Eastwood with his spade, and then again the film breaks for another musical interlude, that incredible long protracted shootout with that wonderful music. Um, this film defies description or praise. It's so wonderful. I've watched it many, many times, and each time it's a phenomenon. It's an experience. It's not just watching a great movie. I feel like I've lived this film, and I know every single music cue. I love that music, that sad music when Clint Eastwood and Wallach discover the American encampment, the Unionist encampment across the bridge, and the sadness of all these men dying just for the sake of this damn bridge. Um, I could talk about this movie forever. Wonderful. But it's still not my favourite Leone. The greatest achievement of Leone is Once Upon a Time in the West. And this is one of the great films of all time. No question. It is one of the finest westerns, if not the finest western ever made, and one of my favourite films ever. I don't even know where to start with it, so let's start with the start, because I once wrote an essay on the start of this film, just the beginning. The opening credit sequence is the greatest opening credit sequence in movies. It's three guys holding up a train station. They go out onto the platform, and the rest of this very long extended sequence is them just sitting and waiting for the train. One of them cracks his knuckles. He's going. Woody Strode stands underneath a water tower, and there's a drip of water on his hat. The sounds are so important. You know, they took out Morricone's music, and they just used this musique concrète of sounds. Jack Elam is sitting and he's listening to a fly buzzing, then he traps it in his gun barrel and he listens to it. Each sound is like a musical note. There's a wonderful anecdote, actually. One of the sounds is this of this windmill going round. And what actually happened, I don't know if this is an apocryphal story, but what happened was it's apparently that someone oiled the windmill, and Leone went crazy and said, no, no, that's what we want. We want that sound. It's an incredible opening. Then you hear the scream of the train. The train stops. You get the pff, pff of the steam. Pff, pff. Everything is, sound is behind every moment. And then the train moves off, and then you hear that wonderful harmonica tune played by Charles Bronson's character. And there's the build, and then you get the shots. And everyone seems to die. Everyone seems to get killed. And you go back to the of the windmill. It's such a perfect sequence. It's so brilliant. And then you get this incredible tight close-up of Bronson as he wakes up and staggers off out of the station. So that's the greatest opening credit sequence of all time. But let's talk about the two sequences that follow it, shall we? Then we get to the incredible sequence where this family living out beyond the town are murdered by Henry Fonda and his henchmen. Brilliantly directed. And what I love about it is when the family are killed and all shot down, a little boy runs out of the house, and bang, this kind of electric guitar almost comes out. Ding. It's an incredible moment. Again, I go back to this idea of the organic, instinctive nature of Leone's cinema. It's just so perfect. And then you see these men rise up from the ground like ghosts. like this phalanx of a sort of Roman army in these incredible duster jackets. And in between them is Henry Fonda. The camera circles round in on Henry Fonda's face, and those incredible piercing, incredible blue eyes. He's kind of got this kind of mumbling kind of mouth like he's chewing gum. It's an extraordinary close-up. Apparently, Fonda turned up on the set wanting to wear black contact lenses. Leone said, "Get rid of them. We want those piercing blue eyes." And it's an extraordinary sequence. And then Fonda shoots the boy, and as he shoots, the sound of the gun rhymes with the sound of the train, bringing Claudia Cardinale to the station. She comes out. Morricone's most beautiful music begins, the theme of the film, and she's looking around for this family who are going to greet her. She goes to the station, she walks through the station, and the camera lifts so beautifully, so gracefully above the roof of the station, and there is the West. It is one of the most beautiful sequences in film. The whole film is staggering. The performances, the casting and the performances of Bronson, Robards, Henry Fonda and Claudia Cardinale was inspired. And it builds towards one of the great endings of cinema, where Charles Bronson and Henry Fonda, while the West is slowly growing, the rail line is coming, civilization is coming, they, the last men, the last mythical men of this world, have their shootout. With this flashback, as I said at the beginning, to this incredible primal scene, the primal sin of Henry Fonda's character, killing Charles Bronson's brother. And then Fonda dies, he's killed, and Robards and Bronson move off. Robards also dies from a wound, and Claudia Cardinale, the woman, is left to become the person who will take the West forward. It's an incredible sequence. I love this film so much. I love the music so much. So many musical scenes, like the scene where Fonda comes back to the train where his partner is. The mournfulness on the soundtrack of the music is incredible. And honestly, I could talk about this film so often. Fonda's performance is incredible. This is one of the great films of all time. If you've never seen it, my God, get a copy of it as fast as you can. It's incredible. Okay, I know that was a long video, but I could talk about Sergio Leone all night. I adore his films. One of the great filmmakers of all time. Please let me know your thoughts on Sergio Leone, your favourite films, and I'll see you next time.